Module 4 left you with one of the toughest decisions in conservation: how to allocate the limited funds you have. This module guides you in putting together a funding proposal drawing on your conservation standards-based plans to raise the necessary funds for your project. Note that this module is not intended to teach you fundraising, but rather to show you how to use your conservation standards-based strategic plans to inform your funding proposal and describe it to your donors in a language that they can relate to. In this module, you will learn how to approach fundraising from a conservation standards perspective. You'll explore how to match your conservation standards products to different donors' fundraising templates, tailor your proposals to attract the necessary funding, and manage your donor relationships after you've received the funds. By the end of this module, you will be able to demonstrate the following skills or competencies: write an effective fundraising proposal based on your conservation standards products, match conservation standards products to relevant sections of a donor's proposal template, describe your conservation standards outputs to your donors in a way that appeals to their interests and requirements, and list what it takes to maintain an effective donor-grantee relationship. So you remember, we are at step 3 of the conservation standards. More specifically, we are at the point of refining and seeking additional budget. Right at the beginning of this course, we found ourselves embarking on a journey from the planning stage to the actual implementation of your project. You could say you equipped your car and you are now ready for the road. The only thing missing is some gas in the tank. It's a little bit like back in the day when you were just finishing high school and perhaps planning that fun road trip. In order to put gas in the tank, you may have had to go ask your parents. Now, your parents want to make sure you are safe. They want to know your car is roadworthy and that you've thought of everything you might need for the journey. In some ways, this mirrors how to approach your prospective donor. Don't sell them the idea of a car and a road trip. Rather, demonstrate that you are truly road ready. So, on the one side is you and your project. On the other is the donor. Your donor, at least initially, may seem mysterious, like an unknown entity. Your job is to gather as much information as possible about your donor so you can get clarity on who they are, what they do, and what they require from you. Before starting to actually write your proposal, there are a few things you want to be sure to line up. First of all, you want to ensure you're not on your own. Put together an application team, including internal reviewers of your funding proposal. It will make your work a lot easier, and your proposal will benefit from the collective wisdom of the various minds working together on it. Second, read the proposal requirements carefully. Make sure you understand what the donor's mission is, what type of projects they fund, and what their requirements are. You want to make sure you understand where your project might fit in and how you can best present it to respond to their needs and interests. Third, get in touch with the donor. Let them know that you intend to put together a proposal and determine what they expect from you. Get answers to any questions you might have before going into the writing phase. While you should understand your potential donor's openness to discussions and questions, you should also try to ask probing questions whenever possible. But as we said in the beginning of this module, this is about how to match the conservation standards products that you already have, such as your conservation targets, your threat prioritization, situation model, and results chains, to the requirements of your donor. To do that, you need to crosswalk your donor's key requirements with your conservation standards components. Which products can you use in which chapters of the proposal to best address each specific donor question or requirement? It is helpful to build a table or cheat sheet where you align your products with the required proposal elements. For example, the donor asks for a project title. If you don't have a catchy title for your project yet, you are most likely going to be able to get title ideas from your vision statement. The project justification could be provided by highlighting the direct threats you identified in your conservation standards process. For the context, you could consider using a simplified version of your situation model to represent a high-level situation analysis. And on that, a word of caution, as many people, seasoned staff members included, tend to forget. Be sure you don't just paste a diagram into the document without explaining it. Instead, consider simplifying your diagram and make sure you write a brief but clear narrative to go along with it. That holds true for any diagram or table that you insert into the proposal. Be sure to clearly explain what the reader is looking at and how it relates to the overall proposal. Continue to compare and match the language of the proposal with your conservation standards terms and products. Next, be sure to speak the donor's lingo. In other words, present all your information in a way that matches the donor's language instead of your or the conservation standards language. This is where it's helpful to create a matrix that matches terms. You might be approaching several donors, and most likely each of them will have their own language and set of terms. So write your conservation standards terms in one column and then match them to each donor's terminology. You will notice that some terms align well, while other terms seem quite different. However, the concepts are similar, so this is where it is important for you to be able to play the role of a translator, finding ways to describe your strategic plans into the donor's language. When you compare the requirements of multiple donors, you will find that terms that actually mean the same thing could range widely at times. So creating a table like this helps you to keep track of different terms and enables you to address donor requirements using their language. For example, what you call your identified critical threats is what one donor may call the description of the issue being addressed, while another may call it the rationale. Similarly, your goals might be someone else's outcomes or targets, which by conservation standards definition is something completely different. So be willing to be flexible with language. It is best to approach the donor in their own language and demonstrate that your proposed work is less about sticking to terms and more about pursuing positive, measurable impact in the field. Here is a real-life example from a 2019 call for proposals to apply for medium-sized grants. Let's take a look at the format in which this potential donor expects to receive your project information. Please note that we blurred out text-heavy parts in order to really focus on the key messages we want to deliver. Apart from the legal information and documentation you almost always have to supply, this donor wants to understand your organizational capacity and experience. In this case, you could use your team analysis as well as the staff and partner organization tables that you completed at the very beginning of step 1 of the conservation standards to demonstrate your team's abilities. In another section, the donor wants to see your problem and context analysis. This section would benefit from a high-level situation model along with a good narrative to explain it. Additionally, you could provide your threat identification and threat rating, your target viability assessment, as well as your stakeholder analysis. Remember to always provide a short but precise narrative to all diagrams and tables that you include to help the person reading your application truly understand what you intend to convey with your diagram or table. Let's move on. Here in section 5.2, the donor wants to see your objectives, expected results, and activities. If you read carefully between the lines, you realize that the donor is asking for your theory of change. So provide your results chains along with your objectives and again add a descriptive and captivating narrative for each. Each results chain, together with its narrative, should make a compelling and convincing case that your project is well thought through and worth funding. Additionally, provide your goals to clarify the expected impact you assume your project will have. To provide even more depth, you might also choose to showcase parts of your monitoring plan. This donor actually has a follow-up section where they ask for the intervention logic and monitoring using a logical framework. You probably don't want to put your results chains in multiple places, so think about where it makes most sense and find the right product and format for each chapter. If your donor is key to see a log frame format, well then make sure you present your information in that format. You can still provide a results chain and add a narrative to both to explain your theory of change. Also note that below there is a chapter on stakeholders, so this might be the right place for your stakeholder analysis. Last but not least, the donor is asking for a project's timeline and milestones. Use your work plan as well as your monitoring plan to fulfill the donor's request here. List objectives and goals as needed to make your case. This is just one of many donor template examples out there. Be aware that yours might differ and be prepared to adapt accordingly. No matter the proposal requirements, there is one thing that even seasoned practitioners often forget, and that is to transform their rich and complex process products into powerful and understandable communication snippets. Be sure to simplify diagrams before adding them to a proposal. Don't overwhelm your audience with a diagram that may be correct in terms of content, but is just way too complex for your donor to understand. Instead, build high-level diagrams that are condensed and down to the point. Write a few sentences that explain your diagram like shown here in the example. If you wish and the donor format allows, you could put your more complete diagram in an annex or provide a hyperlink to an online version of it. Also, it's better not to clutter your proposal with extensive tables from your strategic plan or your target viability assessment. Instead, only highlight the most important aspects of your table in the proposal. Write a few sentences to explain its importance and make the full documents available through an annex or consider hyperlinking to the online version if available. So, now that you have identified and designed the products you'll be using for each chapter in the proposal, you might want to consider creating a checklist and schedule for the proposal writing phase. Make sure to assign responsibilities to your team members. Also, don't forget to set deadlines and ensure you set up regular meetings to discuss progress and potential obstacles. Then, jointly develop the story you want to tell and build an outline around that. Only then you should start with the writing. So now let's talk about the actual writing process. There are a few tips and tricks to keep in mind. First of all, be sure to use active voice in your style. For example, you should write, "We will conduct an outreach campaign," instead of "An outreach campaign will be conducted." Don't forget the donor has certain interests and an agenda to fund projects of a certain kind in order to achieve their organizational goals. Make sure to clearly connect the donor's interest to what you intend to do. Make it easy for them to fund you by showing them how your project will help advance their goals. Show them you share their values. Answer their questions directly. It also helps to use bolded headings that clearly map to donors' requirements and needs so they can quickly see how your project satisfies their needs. But remember, donors are busy people. Keep it short and sweet. Tell your story as clearly as you can. If you absolutely must provide more information, then consider hyperlinking to a webpage or other place where they can access more information if they want. It helps if you know your key messages and get to the point straight away. What is your organization about? What is special about what you do and how you do it? What is the problem you intend to solve and how will you solve it? Certainly, one of the great strengths you can list is that your project is conceived using the open standards. And that is because more and more donors these days appreciate funding proposals built with the conservation standards, as they provide a clear structure and facilitate logical, well-organized, and comprehensive projects. When writing proposals to potential donors, your job is to help your donors understand why investing in your project is a good use of their limited conservation resources. As we said, you may choose to sell your project to the donor by emphasizing your team used the conservation standards to develop it and by demonstrating how the methodology has helped you build a robust plan that will lead to measurable impacts. Here are 5 reasons why donors like projects built on the conservation standards, and you might want to highlight these aspects in your proposal. First, the conservation standards provide a systematic process that incorporates input from multiple stakeholders. As such, a conservation standards strategic plan is more likely to be well thought out and have key stakeholder buy-in. Furthermore, a conservation standards plan clearly states what the team will do and what it will not do. It also includes clear, measurable goals and objectives, and it supports teams identify existing evidence that could help inform their choice of the most effective actions. Where sufficient evidence does not exist, the conservation standards help teams set up a framework for determining what works, what doesn't, and why. Through that, it facilitates a team's ability to learn and adapt and do better conservation in the end. Okay, so let's quickly jump into the future and let's assume your proposal was accepted and you were granted the funds you were asking for. Well, congratulations. the fog has lifted and you are ready to make the journey. But this is not where it stops. Here are a few tips that help you keep the funders as well as you and your team happy. First of all, strive to be honest and transparent at all times. This is the basis for a good relationship of any kind. If things go off track, tell the donor as soon as possible and use your conservation standards plan, including your theory of change and your situation model, of course, to diagnose what went wrong and what corrective actions you may need to take. Keep your donor updated as you go through this process. Also, make sure the reporting mechanism is efficiently designed so that you don't spend all of your resources on reporting instead of your actual work. If you have multiple donors, you may want to ask whether they are willing to let you streamline your reporting. And remember, this might not be the last time the donor funds you, so make sure to maintain a healthy relationship. That's it for this module. We hope you feel equipped to match your conservation standards products to a donor template, write a compelling and effective fundraising proposal, and maintain a good donor relationship. And well, enjoy the journey, and we'll see you in the next module where we talk about how to prepare for collecting and managing data that you will later use to analyze your project's progress and effectiveness.